Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into Tulsi Gabbard's journey to becoming the Director of National Intelligence. You've given us such an interesting mix of sources for this one, like political analysis, biographical info, oh, and even some social media stuff and podcast clips. It seems like she's a figure who really gets people talking, So I'm ready to get into it.
Yeah, definitely seems like her appointment has stirred things up a bit. I think what's immediately striking is that she's breaking barriers, being the first Hindu and Samoan American elected to Congress. It just brings a whole new level of representation to the intelligence community, which is pretty cool.
That's a great point. And she's definitely had a non-traditional path, even before the DNI role, serving in the Hawaii Army National Guard, being deployed to Iraq and Kuwait. It's not your typical resume for someone heading up intelligence agencies.
Absolutely. And all of that experience combined with her early start in politics,
Hmm.
becoming the youngest woman elected as a state representative in America at 21. I mean, it just makes you think about how all of that must have shaped her approach to leadership in some way, right?
Yeah, for sure. It makes you wonder how all of that prior experience will actually translate to this very specific role. But before we get into that, we should probably address the elephant in the room, her confirmation process. From what I've seen in these materials you've shared, it was anything but smooth sailing.
You're right, there was definitely some pushback. A lot of it seems to come from her switch from the Democratic to the Republican Party. And then, you combine that with her foreign policy views, especially on Russia and Syria.
Yeah,
It hasn't exactly been, mainstream.
you're telling me.
Right.
The fact that she defended Edward Snowden, and I remember reading about some of her past comments on Russia and Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Well, let's just say those raised a few eyebrows.
For sure. It's interesting, though, because some sources portray her as this, maverick, someone who isn't afraid to challenge conventional thinking. But then others suggest that she's aligning herself with viewpoints that are, at the very least, controversial.
Yeah.
And at worst, potentially dangerous.
Right. And the drama didn't stop there, right? Even within her own party. Only one Republican Senator, Mitch McConnell, opposed her nomination. What was that all about?
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting. The sources you gave me suggest there might be a deeper political strategy at play here. Some people speculate that McConnell saw her nomination as an opportunity, like a way to further disrupt the Biden administration and create a figurehead within the intelligence community who, might be more aligned with certain Republican ideologies.
Okay, so we've got this complex figure with a history of challenging the status quo, and now she's in one of the most sensitive positions in the government. It makes you wonder, what are her real strengths and weaknesses? And how will they play out in this role?
Right, and that's where those analyses you included come in. You've got SWOT, PESTEL, SPEAR, and MOSE analysis in the mix here. And these frameworks can really help us understand her potential, but also the challenges she faces. And they do it from all different angles.
I'll admit, when I first saw all those acronyms, I was a bit overwhelmed. Can we break them down one by one? Maybe starting with PESTEL. I'm curious to see how that framework applies to Gabbard specifically.
Sure. So the PESTEL analysis is all about looking at the broader environment. The political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal factors.
Yeah.
All the things that might impact someone's effectiveness in a role. It's great for getting the big picture.
Okay, so let's apply that to Gabbard. Politically, her party switch is definitely going to be a major factor. How do the sources see that impacting her ability to navigate the political landscape and work with both Democrats and Republicans?
Well, they kind of suggest it could be a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it might give her some leverage in working across the aisle. She's shown she's not beholden to one party line. But on the other hand, it could also make her an easy target for criticism from both sides.
Right, it's almost like she's starting from a position of needing to build trust with everyone. What about the economic factors? The DNI oversees a massive budget. I read somewhere it's over $100 billion. How could her economic policies, which I assume are influenced by her political leanings, affect her decisions?
That's a really critical point. One source I read suggested that her fiscal conservatism, which is something she seems to have adopted more recently, it could lead her to prioritize certain intelligence operations over others. For instance, she might favor traditional human intelligence gathering over expensive technological programs.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. The budget is definitely something to keep an eye on.
Okay, so her economic views could really shape the direction of intelligence gathering. What about the S in PESTEL, the social factors? It seems like public perception of her is already pretty divided. How do the sources see that playing out?
They suggest that she'll need to work hard to rebuild trust, not just within the intelligence community, which we'll get to, but also among the public. Her past controversies, particularly those related to Edward Snowden and the Ukraine-Russia conflict, have definitely left a mark. Some argue that her ability to connect with the public will be crucial to her effectiveness as DNI.
Speaking of Snowden, that ties directly into the concerns some senators raised about Gabbard's ability to lead the intelligence community. It's one thing to defend someone like Snowden in the political arena, but how will those within intelligence agencies who often view Snowden as a traitor respond to her leadership?
Yeah, that's a huge question. And it goes beyond just Snowden, too. Her past comments, which some sources perceive as being sympathetic to Russia and Assad, could create a real sense of distrust. We know that Senator Langford, for example, has been vocal about intelligence professionals feeling betrayed by Snowden's actions. So how Gabbard navigates that tension between her past statements and the need to unify the intelligence community will be crucial. It's a tough tightrope to walk.
It's like she's walking into a room where, like, half the people are already suspicious of her. So how does she gain their trust? Where do those opportunities for building those bridges come in? That's where I'm curious about the SWOT analysis you mentioned.
Right, the SWOT analysis can be really helpful for identifying both the opportunities and threats someone faces. And one opportunity the sources highlight is her potential to leverage technology. The intelligence community is increasingly relying on things like artificial intelligence and machine learning. So if Gabbard can effectively advocate for those advancements and demonstrate a clear understanding of their potential, it could help bridge the gap between her and more traditional intelligence professionals.
So demonstrating her tech savviness could be key. And I imagine cybersecurity is a big part of that too, right? Especially given like the increasing sophistication of cyber attacks and just the amount of sensitive information the intelligence community handles.
Oh, absolutely. Cybersecurity is paramount. Some sources suggest that her military background could actually be an asset here. Cybersecurity is a major focus in modern warfare these days, so she might have some insights into how to strengthen the intelligence community's defenses.
That's an interesting point that her military experience might actually give her some common ground with the intelligence community. But even if she can address the technology and cybersecurity concerns, there's still the issue of her controversial views. That's where I'm wondering about the T in SWAT the threats.
Yeah, the SWOT analysis definitely points to political opposition as a major threat. Her changing political affiliations and her unorthodox views could make her a target for political maneuvering, especially if she makes decisions that certain groups disagree with. It's likely she'll face a lot of scrutiny and potential roadblocks from lawmakers who oppose her.
So it's not just about winning over the intelligence community, it's about navigating the larger political landscape as well. It sounds exhausting, honestly. Okay, before we move on to the other frameworks, you mentioned that the pestle analysis also considers environmental and legal factors. Are those significant in this case?
Well, it's always worth considering them. Environmentally, there's the growing concern about climate change and how that's going to impact national security, right? So Gabbard's stance on climate change, which is another area where her views have shifted over time, will likely be scrutinized. As for the legal side, there's the constant tension between national security and individual liberties. So how she balances those competing interests will be crucial, especially in light of past controversies like the Snowden leaks and government surveillance programs.
Right, so the Snowden issue is a prime example of how those legal and ethical considerations collide. It feels like her stance on Snowden is symbolic of a larger divide in how she views the role of intelligence agencies versus individual rights.
You're right, it really gets to the heart of those differing philosophies on national security versus individual privacy. Some sources emphasize that her initial defense of Snowden, who many within the intelligence community view as a traitor, could be incredibly difficult to overcome. But others suggest that her more recent acknowledgement that he broke the law might signal a willingness to find a middle ground.
Okay, so the pestle gives us that broad overview of the context she's operating in. Let's move on to spear analysis. You said it delves deeper into some of those points, but what else does it reveal about Gabbard's potential in this role?
Well, spear helps us understand her aspirations, which are particularly interesting. It highlights her desire to enhance intelligence capabilities and promote collaboration between different agencies. It seems like she wants to break down some of those silos that can exist within the intelligence community.
That sounds promising, especially given the complexity of the threats facing the nation. But I imagine those aspirations come with risks too, right?
Definitely. The spear analysis cautions that she faces risks of, like, political opposition and emerging threats, and that constant public scrutiny we talked about earlier. It also suggests that her lack of direct intelligence experience could hinder her ability to actually implement her ambitious goals.
So even with the best intentions, she might struggle to navigate the complexities of the intelligence world. It makes you wonder how she'll approach those challenges strategically. That brings us to the last framework, MOST, which I understand focuses on goals and how to achieve them.
Exactly. MOST stands for mission, objectives, strategies, and tactics. It's a way to break down how someone plans to accomplish their goals. So according to the MOST analysis, her mission as DNI is to ensure the safety, security, and freedom of the American people. And she aims to do that by providing accurate, unbiased, and timely intelligence.
Sounds straightforward enough. But how does she plan to turn that mission into reality? What are her specific objectives?
Well, the sources suggest her key objectives are to rebuild trust in the intelligence community, both internally and with the public, and to enhance intelligence capabilities, of course, and to strengthen national security. These are broad objectives, of course, and the challenge lies in figuring out how to achieve them.
Okay, so she's got these ambitious goals. What kind of strategies is she using to actually make them happen?
The MOST analysis points to several key strategies. One is leveraging technology, which we've already discussed. Another is enhancing training and development for intelligence personnel. It seems like she wants to invest in the people within the intelligence community, give them the skills and resources they need to be effective.
That makes sense. Investing in people is usually a good strategy. And what about tactics? What are some of the concrete actions she's taking to achieve those objectives?
One tactic that comes up repeatedly is implementing transparency initiatives. For instance, she's mentioned holding regular public briefings and releasing more reports to the public. This seems to be a key part of her plan to rebuild trust.
That's interesting. It seems like she's trying to balance the need for secrecy with the public's right to know. It's a delicate dance. Okay, so we've looked at all those frameworks: PESTLE, SWOT, SPEAR, and MOST. It feels like they give us a pretty good understanding of the context she's operating in, her potential strengths and weaknesses, and the challenges she'll face.
Yeah, they definitely offer some valuable insights. But it's important to remember that they're just tools to help us analyze the situation. They're not crystal balls. They can't predict the future. Ultimately, her success will depend on her ability to adapt, to learn, and to build relationships.
You're right. These frameworks can only take us so far. We need to look at specific events and decisions to really understand how she's operating and what her leadership style might be. And two events stand out in the materials you've shared: the Edward Snowden saga and her comments on the Ukraine-Russia conflict.
Those are definitely two critical areas that have shaped the narrative surrounding her appointment. Let's start with Snowden. It's a case that has divided people for years. Some see Snowden as a hero who exposed government overreach, while others see him as a traitor who compromised national security.
In Gabbard's initial defense of Snowden, even calling him a brave whistleblower didn't exactly endear her to those in the intelligence community who see him very differently.
Right, and that an initial statement has continued to haunt her. However, during her confirmation hearing, she acknowledged that Snowden broke the law. So that shift in her rhetoric is something the sources debate endlessly. Was it a genuine change of heart, or a calculated move to appease those who were skeptical of her?
It's hard to know for sure what her true intentions were. But regardless, it seems like her past support for Snowden has created a trust deficit that she'll need to overcome if she wants to effectively lead the intelligence community.
Absolutely. Many intelligence professionals feel deeply betrayed by Snowden's actions. They see him as someone who violated his oath and put lives at risk. So for Gabbard to gain their trust, she'll need to acknowledge that perspective and demonstrate that she understands the gravity of Snowden's actions, even if she might still hold some sympathy for his motives.
It sounds like she's trying to walk a very fine line. She wants to be seen as someone who supports transparency and accountability, but she also needs to reassure those within the intelligence community that she's not going to undermine their work or put national security at risk. It's a tough balancing act.
And it's made even more complicated by her comments about the Ukraine-Russia conflict.
Right. That tweet she sent on the eve of the Russian invasion, where she stated that the war and suffering could have easily been avoided. That was a pretty explosive statement. And it seemed to align with Russian propaganda that was blaming the West for the conflict.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the content of the tweet, it was the timing. To make matters worse, Russian state TV actually aired her comments, using them to bolster their narrative. It was a public relations disaster for her. And it raised serious concerns about her judgment and her understanding of the geopolitical landscape.
It made people question whether she was being naive or intentionally playing into Russian propaganda. She later tried to clarify her position, condemning Putin's invasion but still maintaining that NATO expansion was a contributing factor. Was that enough to repair the damage?
Well, the sources are divided on that. Some argue that her clarification came too late and didn't fully address the concerns her initial statement raised. They point to this as evidence that she's either out of touch with the realities of the conflict or, worse, sympathetic to Russia's position. Others suggest that she's simply trying to present a more nuanced view of the situation, one that acknowledges the complex historical and geopolitical factors at play.
So it's another case where her words have been open to multiple interpretations. And those interpretations have fueled skepticism about her ability to lead on the world stage. It feels like she's constantly having to defend herself, to prove her loyalty and her competence. It must be exhausting.
It's definitely a challenging position to be in, especially when you're leading an organization as vital as the intelligence community.
And on top of all the external pressure she's got, she's also facing the internal challenges of leading an organization that's known for being, like, resistant to change. I can only imagine how her unconventional background and controversial views are going to play out within those intelligence agencies.
Oh yeah, it's definitely going to be an uphill battle. The sources you sent over paint a pretty clear picture of an intelligence community that values tradition, hierarchy, and a certain level of, conformity. Gabbard's history of challenging norms and speaking her mind, even when it's unpopular, could rub some people the wrong way. It'll be interesting to see how she navigates those internal dynamics.
It's like trying to change the course of a massive ship, you know?
Yeah.
It takes a ton of effort and a really steady hand. So with all of these challenges in mind, both internal and external, what do the sources say about her overall leadership style? Can we get a sense of how she might approach this, incredibly difficult job?
That's the key question, and the sources do offer some clues. One thing that comes up repeatedly is her commitment to transparency. It seems like she truly believes in open communication and accountability, both within the intelligence community and with the public.
But how does that commitment to transparency square with the need for secrecy, which is so ingrained in the intelligence world? Isn't there a risk that her push for transparency could backfire?
That's a valid concern for sure. Some sources suggest that her approach could create friction with those who believe that certain information needs to be kept confidential, for national security reasons. But others argue that her transparency initiatives, like those public briefings and reports we talked about, could actually help rebuild trust with the public and even with allies who might have doubts about her leadership. It's a delicate balance.
It seems like she's always trying to walk this tightrope between being open and being cautious. What about her decision-making process? Do the sources shed any light on how she might approach making those tough calls that are inevitable in this role?
There's not a ton of concrete information on her decision-making style, but the sources do suggest that she's a decisive leader who isn't afraid to take risks. Her military background likely plays a role in that. She's used to making decisions under pressure and dealing with uncertainty.
But being decisive doesn't always guarantee good outcomes, right? It can also lead to, impulsive decisions that have unintended consequences. I'm also wondering about her ability to build consensus. Does she seem like the kind of leader who seeks input from others, or is more likely to go with her gut?
That's an important point, and the sources are somewhat ambiguous on that front. Some suggest that she has a strong personality and can be quite persuasive, but others express concern that her history of making controversial statements might make it difficult for her to build bridges and find common ground.
So it seems like her leadership style is still somewhat of a mystery. Only time will tell how she'll adapt to the unique demands of this role and whether she can effectively lead the intelligence community through these, turbulent times.
You've summed it up perfectly. There are a lot of unknowns, and it's going to be fascinating to watch how it all unfolds.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored Gabbard's unconventional path to becoming DNI, delved into the controversies that have surrounded her career, analyzed her potential strengths and weaknesses, and examined those key events that have shaped public perception. It's been a truly insightful journey.
I agree. It's been a fascinating exploration. What's so intriguing is that we're just at the beginning of her tenure as DNI, It's a story that's still being written, and the outcome is far from certain.
Exactly. We've provided you with the information, the analysis, and the context, but ultimately it's up to you to decide what it all means. Do you believe Gabbard can reconcile her past with the demands of leading the intelligence community? Can she unify an organization that seems deeply divided on her appointment? These are complex questions with no easy answers.
And they're questions that go beyond Tulsi Gabbard herself, right? They touch on the very nature of intelligence gathering in a democracy, the balance between security and liberty, and the role of leadership in navigating an increasingly complex world.
It's a lot to ponder. But that's what we're here for, to give you the tools to think critically and to form your own conclusions. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Tulsi Gabbard and the intelligence community. Until next time, keep exploring.